Hi everyone, this is my review of Sleuth Comics #1 starring Black Owl by Atomic Pulp Comics. As someone who's felt disenfranchised by comics from the big two for well over a decade now, I've been seeking my full colour fix in two other places. The first, easiest and most satisfying of these is in writing my own comics, some of which are being drawn, lettered and coloured right now with plans to be released in 2021. The other is in the ever-widening range of small press and indie comics, particularly those being created by the Comicsgate movement through crowdfunding. I've heard comics described as the greatest visual medium, one that allows more spectacular scenes than the biggest Hollywood blockbusters, and one that allows an unprecedented level of pacing and arrangement of visual elements to complement any given genre. And I agree with this assessment. Despite that, I have to admit that when it comes to comics, there is really only one genre I want to see: superheroes. For me, comics are superheroes and superheroes are comics. I've read and enjoyed crime comics, western comics, horror comics, and I've written and planned to publish all of the above myself. But when it comes to parting with my money, the subject most likely to loosen my purse strings is superheroes. Particularly consistent superhero universes with deep and building lore that draws upon the past rather than ignores or corrupts it. Universes where it's an asset to know what has come before, like a good TV show that references events from Season 2 and Season 7. You can enjoy Season 7 on its own, but I guarantee the person who has watched all the seasons is getting more out of it than you are. It might be no surprise then that since Robert Kirkman's excellent Invincible ended, I've struggled to find a replacement. This is endemic of a larger problem. There was a time when I had a whole company's range of comics to read. DC and Marvel's entire line could arguably fit into the categories I listed above for most of their lifespan, but not so these days. Part of my disillusionment with most modern superhero comics is the big two's love of huge crossover events. Others have waxed lyrical about these, so I won't do the same. Suffice to say, I don't like them, not anymore. The young me thought they were great, but the young me also paid about $2 an issue as opposed to the $7 or $8 I pay now in Australia. I've seen too many good runs ruined by big yearly events being jammed in at the last minute. Mainstream comics are failing me in nearly every metric. Desperate to still feel part of a medium of love for as long as I can remember, I turned from Marvel and DC and looked more and more to smaller publishers and more indie content. The problem I found is that indie comics are rarely about superheroes. They're more frequently autobiographical, or they're political, they're horror, they're crime. Sometimes they're superheroes, but often it's some alternate take on superheroes, something cynical and postmodern and deconstructive. And even when it's not, indie comics often lack the reach, regular timetable, or consistency to develop that deep, expansive lore I'm looking for. Does that mean the kind of comics I'm after don't exist anymore? I hope not. I doubt it. If you do know something that fits these criteria, even if it is from the big two, please let me know in the comments below. I'm always on the lookout for comics like these, so when I happened across this cover on Twitter with a description likening it to Bronze Age comics, I was intrigued. Down here in Australia, we used to be able to buy black and white reprint collections, 3 or 4 Silver Age DC comics bundled together. I'd buy them without covers for 20 or 50 cents from used bookshops as a kid. And one of those reprints was a story pitting the JLA against the crime syndicate. Of all the evil versions of the Justice League members, I found our man to be the most interesting, which is kind of an impressive feat for a character that looks like this. Ever since then, I've had a real love for owl-themed characters. Bronze Age style and our character and this bold cover, I thought it was worth a look at least. The first issue is available for around $2 US, which is any amount for a digital book. I still can't understand big companies charging full price for a digital file. The print copy of Sleuth Comics #1 is available for $5 US. With shipping added on to Australia, that equals about $25 to $30 an issue, so I went with the digital. I don't really like digital, it's never my first choice, and it's not something I want for my own books, but without it I never would have been able to read this fantastic comic, and that would have been a real shame. Something else worth mentioning regarding the price of this book is that this issue, and according to the website, every issue appears to be 32 pages long. That's worth more than $2 digitally. You owe it to yourself to check out this book. The upcoming review is going to have spoilers, but with the story laying out so many potential plot threads for future issues, I don't feel like knowing what happens in this book is a great detriment to enjoying it yourself, or to enjoying future issues. First I'll be looking at the covers. There are 3 variants, and the digital version comes with all 3. All 3 covers have some great trade dress on them. The Atomic Pulp logo in a 50s retro font, the 70s era banner with red, white and blue across the top with a headshot of the hero in the middle. The title of the comic is actually Sleuth Comics starring all new Black Owl, but Sleuth Comics takes a distant backseat to Black Owl's logo, which also has a solid 50s to 70s style font that wouldn't look out of place on an all-white diner sign somewhere. The title colour matches the hero's outfit on all 3 covers. Some titles have had tremendous success using a changing colour palette on the title logo to complement the art and colour scheme of the cover. I'm thinking specifically of Savage Dragon, that for many years had bold, striking colours that managed to stand out from the competition. It looks like at this point Atomic Pulp Comics are using the same colour scheme on the logo for each issue, as issues 2 and 3 have identical logos. The banner also lets us know that the issue has a guest appearance from Mike Lancer, Private Eye. When I saw this, I thought maybe that the Mike Lancel story would be a backup, a practice that seemed to happen more freely a few decades ago. Either way, guest appearances or a backup story, it gives a feeling of a larger connected universe, like Slam Bradley stumbling onto one of Batman's cases. The first cover is the most modern of the three, as well as the most generic. It's almost a portfolio piece, Black Owl swinging through the city, a generic disembodied skull screaming silently in the background. The two blurbs on the front hint as to the skull's identity. I'm a proponent of covers hinting at what's actually happening inside the book, enticing the potential reader to become an actual reader. I don't really like portfolio pieces, small works of art though some might be, for a few reasons. They tend to be bland, similar, uninspired. They fail to do their job, which is to draw in new readers. Regular readers, the ones with a pull box or a pull list, won't be turned on or off by a good cover or a lackluster cover. Collectors don't want holes in their collection. Because many modern covers are commissioned portfolio pieces or rework sketches, they often have little to nothing to do with what's inside the book. It also means they don't match the artwork in the comic, and usually the art on the cover exceeds the quality of the interior art. These days I always flip through a book before I buy it for this very reason. Too often in the past I've bought a book foolishly believing the inside would look as good as the outside, and it became a real trend, I believe about 10 to 15 years ago, to use these portfolio piece covers. I first remembered on Tim Bradstreet's standing and holding a gun menacingly Punisher covers and the generic leaping while yelling covers of Greg Rucka's otherwise excellent Wolverine run. I think these two instances are exceptions. Both stories were mature and had significant gravity. Rucka's story, The Coyote, dealt with a touchy subject even back then of illegal immigrants coming into the United States. A story like that, where there are shades of grey and nothing for Logan to kill, didn't need bombastic slogans and promises of two-fisted action. After a while, though, these exceptions became the rule, and most covers I see from the big two, I think Marvel's the worst offender in this instance, seems to be generic hero runs or leaps at the viewer while grimacing pictures. This cover has modern digital colouring techniques and art reminiscent of someone like Alan Davis or Tom Grummett. The anatomy is detailed without being exaggerated. The perspective on the building seems to be a little bit off, but it does the job. This cover is an unusual choice. The art is more detailed and sophisticated than that of the interior. The interior art, we'll see in a minute, perfectly suits the era it is aping. If the interior matched the cover art, I think some of the illusion would have been lost, but it's still a comic I would like to have read. The second cover, or cover B, is in my opinion the strongest of the three, even though it's not the cover that actually sold me on the book. This is the cover that, if the book were published in the Silver Age or the Bronze Age, the late 70s, the early 80s, would be the one you'd see on the shelves or the spinner racks. It's not a portfolio piece, it's a direct reflection of what happens in the book. Unlike cover A, it clearly shows and identifies the villain and speaks to the dilemma Black Owl finds himself in this issue. He's being attacked by mind-controlled civilians and can't effectively fight back. The art and the colouring on this cover is a little simpler. The lines are less detailed, the colours flatter, but that only adds to the era-specific look the book is going for. Cover C is actually the cover I saw on Twitter, the one that motivated me to go to the website and purchase the comic. I'd love to get these comics in a physical copy, but again, the postage costs are exorbitant. Maybe someday I'll buy the first 10 issues and have the whole lot shipped over. This cover, even though it's the one to entice me into buying, is in many ways the weakest of the three. The colouring in particular is quite sloppy. It looks like it's unfinished or done in a rush. In several places you can see the select tool allowed colour to bleed from behind the artwork. Most of the colouring is simple gradients that haven't really been shaped to suit the image. Despite that, it has great composition, bold, stylish and strong, with plenty of imposing blacks and a red night sky reminiscent of Bruce Timm's art direction on the animated Batman series. The rest of the cover elements are present on cover C, but in a different configuration. The SLEUTH COMICS logo looks particularly authentic in bold yellow and era-specific font. You might think I've spent a lot of time in this review looking at the cover, but we literally judge things by their appearance every day. The contribution a good cover makes to a book's ability to be sold can't be overlooked. So many of the big two's books fail this first and simplest test. Does the cover make me want to pick it up? If the answer is no, why would I take the next step to pick it up and flip through the book? On a wall with hundreds of issues every week, every month, why would I spend a second longer than I have to looking at a lackluster cover? The answer is, of course, I won't. I'm halfway to dead already. If you're going to pitch me a bland, flat image of your protagonist jumping aggressively at an imaginary or off-page target, you just won't get my money. The book starts with Black Owl on patrol. We're told he has electronic equipment in his cowl that enhances his senses, which is a cool gimmick for an owl-themed character to have. He's got night vision and enhanced hearing. His silhouette even looks like an owl. The glowing eyes, the little horned risers on his cowl, the mantle of his cloak, it all adds to the owl imagery. The buildings are boldly drawn with highly contrasting colours, making it very easy to see depth and scale. Black Owl responds to an alarm. There's a robbery at a jewellery store, and as he ziplines towards the crime, he wonders, why does it have to be that jewellery store? Even without any previous knowledge of the character, you realise there was probably some past tragedy here, and seeing as it's a jewellery store and most heroes need some sort of motivation to put on costumes and fight crime, we can guess it was probably a fiancé who died and he bought the engagement ring from that particular jewellery store. This is some nice foreshadowing by Christopher Mills, who also edits and letters the book. The jewellery store heist is the scheme of Funnybone, a red-suited supervillain with a flair for alliteration. A cursory look online couldn't confirm if Funnybone is a real character from the golden age of comics. If anybody knows, please let me know in the comments section below. Even if he isn't, Funnybone perfectly encapsulates the golden age prankster/trickster villain archetype, which obviously the Joker perfected, but many other examples exist, including the prankster, the trickster, arguably the Toyman, Puzzler, Mr. That guy, J. Wilbur Wolfington, aka the Conman, among others. If you can think of any other trickster villains, please add them in the comments below. Black Owl uses some classic 70s martial arts to take down the thugs, while Funnybone tries to make a getaway. Funnybone lunges at Owl with his walking stick called the Pain Cane, who easily sidesteps it. Now, I haven't read any future issues of Black Owl, so I don't know if this is more foreshadowing, but after Owl admonishes Funnybone for even trying such a played-out trick, Funnybone grins and whispers, "We thought it was worth a try." The police show up to take the criminals away, and the Inspector and Black Owl trash-talk Funnybone, with Owl claiming Funnybone needs to retire. He's not even a challenge anymore. I hope this is leading to a power upgrade or some greater scheme or scam by Funnybone, where he deliberately allows himself to be captured as part of a bigger heist. Another thing I considered was that Funnybone was possessed or under some kind of mental influence when he said "we thought it was worth a try," indicating maybe there's more than one personality in his head. The Inspector lets Owl know that Mike Lancer, private investigator, is trying to get a hold of him. So Owl goes to Lancer's office. You get a nice establishing shot, drab colours and rundown decor, let you know that Lancer doesn't work out of the nicest part of town. Owl and Lancer swap some banter before the PI tells Owl that while on a case he saw a gang of drug dealers draw their guns and start shooting each other down. He attributes it to the mental influence of a shadowy figure. Owl asks if Lancer told the cop about this, but Lancer says with his bad rep as a killer he doesn't need any more suspicion thrown on him. Plus, dealing with supervillains is the Owl's territory. Owl tells Lancer to keep his nose clean, and Lancer shoots back that at least what he does is legal. He has a PI license, while the Owl is straight up a vigilante. Next we see Owl at home in his owl nest just before dawn, surrounded by gadgets. Again, we've got this high contrast colouring style that makes finding depth and levels of scale easy to comprehend. The art is so stark and bold that nothing is lost when viewing it. We're told the lady in the jumpsuit holding a wrench is the twin sister of the Owl's dead fiancé. Called it. They discuss what villains could do what Lancer describes, but the list is short and most are accounted for. Christopher Mills uses the conceit of talking about old adventures as if they've already happened. This hints to a continued storyline, a consistent timeline, even though to date none of these adventures have actually been published. Owl decides to go pay the dead gangster's boss a visit, and since this book's set in the 70s, his nickname is of course the Disco Don. The narrator tells us Owl spends his day training in the martial arts, studying and meditating. At this point I didn't know about Owl's superpowers, so I was wondering when he actually sleeps. It turns out he doesn't. As explained in the Who's Who style page at the back of the book, the bullet that killed his fiancée lodged itself in his brain, affecting his sleep centre. As a result, he no longer needs to sleep. Owl arrives at Studio 45, a club he used to frequent with his fiancée. The mob boss is chilling with Mary Jane Watson and the girl from Flashdance when Owl suddenly appears before him demanding answers. Owl peacefully convinces the bodyguards to stand aside and let him talk to their boss. Kane denies the dead gangsters were his employees, and that even the police report said they all killed each other and it's a closed case. Suddenly everybody screams and falls to the floor, clutching their ears. Owl rushes to the dance floor to find the Silent Skull. This guy is pure Silver Age badass, a skull head, bright red power armor, and an alliterative name. His deal is he psychically screams, debilitating everybody even though nobody can actually hear him make any sound. The Owl is the only one unaffected but finds he's no physical match for the Skull. The Skull compels the crowd to attack Black Owl and they surround him. Like a true Silver Age hero, Owl is concerned first and foremost with the safety of the bystanders and uses gas pellets to escape the club, but by then the Silent Skull has vanished. This is page 21 of the comic, and by this point most modern comics would be finished or a page or two away from being finished, and at a pace for the trade industry I could see this being the final panel on the first of a 2 or 3 part story. The next few issues would just need a B-plot, something to pad out a few more pages to reach the conclusion in the allotted number of pages. Instead, we've only just passed the 2/3 point, and we will end up with a complete self-contained story with a beginning, middle and an end within a single issue. Owl returns to the nest and Athena patches him up. The casual way they converse and the light digs they have at each other show how comfortable they are together, and I could see this becoming a romance angle in the near future. I feel like Christopher Mills is doing a great job setting up future plot threads. Athena dubs the new menace the Silent Skull, and Owl muses that he alone is immune to the Skull's power. At first I thought it might have been the electronics in his cowl that filtered out the silent scream. But even cooler than that, the bullet lodged in his brain allows Owl to reject the Skull's mental control. By now we realise the Skull was the shadowy figure that made the gangsters kill each other, and by showing up at the disco it looks like he has a grudge against the Disco Don. Talking about the bullet makes both Owl and Athena sad and reflect on the mutually lost loved one, immediately putting some distance between the sparks we just saw on the last page. This is some really good writing. Al convinces Athena that she's up to the task of creating a device to shield others from the Skull's power using the same principle that provided Al with his immunity. I guess everybody in the book should be thankful Athena didn't just buy a gun and start shooting people in the brain. The Disco Don is in his high-rise, lamenting the loss of the biggest drug deal he's ever put together. Here's another display of good, clean-cut writing with no fat. Stephen King recommends cutting at least 10% of your word count from your finished draft to make it punchier and leaner. Christopher Mills knows about lean. He uses the first panel to establish Kane's mood, wealth and location, the second to let the reader know something is wrong, and then the third is a menacing, inhuman silhouette, and we know before Kane does that he is in trouble. Kane can hear the skull talking inside his head, and this is such a great panel, so powerful, with the skull pointing right at the reader, strangely human even while being an emotionless skull. The skull reveals he is actually Kane's own brother, betrayed by the gangster, killed and reborn in an explosion of toxic chemicals. Al arrives just in time, and Skull uses his powers to control the two goons. This bit made me laugh. The phone rings, Al knocks out the bodyguard and says, "It's for you." Yeah, it's a dad joke, but I'm a dad and I can enjoy it. While Al's fighting the goons, the Silent Skull attacks, and once again Al finds himself physically outmatched. He falls back on his gadgets and uses an expanding plastifoam to encompass and subdue the skull. The police show up wearing helmets that protect them from the skull's power that Athena managed to cobble together on short notice. Kane is arrested as well, and the inspector says that the mobster's catatonia might be a permanent condition. As the Silent Skull is loaded on a Karen Labs truck, the driver radios in that he has acquired the subject. Hopefully this leads to some sort of rogues gallery type situation where Al's enemies are being collected to team up against him in the future. However it unfolds, it's yet another plot point that Christopher Mills has lined up for the future. The last panel has a next issue blurb telling the reader that the threat facing Black Al next issue will require him to team up with Ms. Fury, the 70s Women's Lib update of Miss Fury. This is followed by a 2-page letter column with missives from fans. I wasn't sure if they were real or doctored the way they were in the Amalgam Comics event of the 90s, but they seem genuine and the tone is effusive, with the fans expressing sentiments similar to mine. Then I noticed some big names like Mort Castle, Mike W. Barr and Andrew Kaplan, and I noticed the letters referring to events that happened in the issue I was reading. Following the letters page is an ad for other Atomic Pulp books available for sale, both of which I've purchased and will review at a later date. The icing on the cake for me was the classic 2-page Marvel Handbook style profile of Black Al detailing his statistics, history, abilities and equipment. This is a great way to catch people up on who he is and why he does what he does. Most of the information we already got in the preceding issue, but it's nice to have something more formal like this, and it's got some heavy nostalgia value for someone like me who grew up with these things. There's a Marvel bullpen style page with a blurb by the creator, writer, editor Chris Mills, and an overview of other available comics in the line, as well as others coming soon. Finally, we're treated to a Hostess Twinkie style ad starring Atomic Mouse, who is a real character with an alter ego of Kemosabe, which is atomic spelt backwards. I wonder if Alan Moore knew about this when he wrote Miracle Man. I'd like to think he did. The back page is an ad for Atomic Pulp with a great Black Terror redesign, front and centre. There's a really 70s super spy look to it. I hope there's something else Chris Mills has in the pipeline for the near future. There's a lot to like in this comic. The good is pretty much everything from the front to the back cover. This book has everything I miss from comic books. The art style is bold, strong, old school, and the colours are flat and high contrast, making it very easy to see what's going on. Absent are the muted pastels of modern comics, replaced with the excitement and impact of their forebears. There's not a lot to go in this section with this particular book. Yes, some of the art is a little weak and a panel here or there could have used a redraw, but that's really about it. And if anything, it only adds to the retro feel. I'm sure most of you have heard the Jack Kirby quote where he says he's paid to draw, not erase. This book ticks so many boxes for me, I really can't find anything to take fault with. If you compare it with a modern book, or if you're a younger or a newer comic fan, or even someone who prefers the modern age of comics, you might not appreciate these elements the way I do. But I'm glad somebody's still making comics the way I want to see them made. I'm not sure why Atomic Pulp has decided to only make the first issue of the series digital. It might be an attempt to minimise piracy, or it might be more of an alternate comic / your boy Zach mentality of getting physical comics into stores and into people's hands. It might be a print-on-demand type situation, and they don't want thousands of unsold copies sitting around their offices or homes. Shipping makes buying these books issue by issue untenable, and waiting for the trade, even if there are plans to publish a trade, seems to exacerbate the problems comic book shops have been facing for at least a decade. The next issue introduces a 70s era Miss Fury, a public domain superheroine. Apparently historically the first ever written and drawn by a woman, I'm told. As much as I want to see how this updated version interacts with Black Al, I won't be able to until Atomic Pulp decides to release this issue in a digital format. My gripes with the digital versus physical aside, this book is the template I'd like to see comic companies go back to using. You put out a half a dozen $2 or $3 books a week, every month that build a shared world. You create a line of comics that are consistent. You add to what came before and you grow characters. You diversify titles organically and allow readers to build a solid collection. I've hardly bought a physical comic since Invincible ended because nothing appeals to me, and if something did, you just know it'll be ignored, retconned, forgotten about, or undermined in the next arc or the one after that. With Big 2 going more and more non-continuity, it's harder than ever to find comics that tick these boxes for me. Atomic Pulp is building that shared world with plenty of guest spots and cross-title acknowledgement of other characters. We've all seen people flipping out over Easter eggs like the Star Labs sign in the background or a LexCorp truck in Man of Steel. These fuller on-page cameos are a great way to remind us that these characters all occupy the same space and builds a sense of time, a feeling these characters have all been existing simultaneously before we happen to come across them and read their adventures. As a comic fan, a shared universe is one of the most valued and sought-after elements. Will incorporating these changes save the industry? Probably not. But by incorporating these elements, I believe a publisher with access to stores, newsagents and other non-direct market avenues could begin to build something significant. Something that will draw real lasting fans who are willing to invest long term. For those of you interested in OWL-based characters or reimagined public domain heroes, like I am, Mark Poulter, one of the writers of John Mayallon's Graveyard Shift and Sea Dog Kill Switch, is releasing his own Black Owl comic later this year through Indiegogo. He promises the book will be completed before the campaign even starts, so backers should get the book in hand soon after the campaign ends. Also, check out the work of Otto Gruenwald on Tapas. He's writing an amazing Stardust comic that incorporates many Golden Age heroes. His stuff is amazing. Just read some of the character backgrounds he's put together. Then check out his Trespasser Prose series. It's one of the most original new characters I've ever read. Otto will make you rethink vigilantes and the nature of violence and superheroes. I'm not exaggerating when I say I think this guy is this generation's Alan Moore or Grant Morrison in the making. The guy is that good.